The morning Isla Hartley turned 19, the sky over Clearwater County hung low and colorless. Not quite gray, not quite white. Just that empty shade of early March when winter hasn't fully released its grip. But spring refuses to arrive. She stood in the parking lot of the Youth Services building with everything she owned inside a canvas backpack. The fabric was faded to a dull olive green, the kind of color that had once been something brighter. The zipper didn't close all the way anymore. A frayed corner of a t-shirt stuck out from the gap. $43 in her wallet. That was the sum total of her savings. 4 years of odd jobs, birthdays without gifts, Christmases spent watching other kids get care packages from relatives she didn't have. $43 was what those years had added up to. Behind her, the heavy door to the building clicked shut. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt permanent. For the last time, she wasn't going back through that door. For the last time, there would be no curfew. No shared bathroom. No caseworker asking her about plans she didn't have. The rules said you aged out at 19. What that really meant was simpler. You were on your own. Isla adjusted the straps on her backpack and looked down the empty road. The asphalt was still wet from last night's rain. Puddles reflected the pale sky like mirrors. In the distance, mountains rose in long ridges, their peaks still white with snow. Somewhere out there was a future she couldn't see yet. And right now, standing in this parking lot with $43 and nowhere to go, that future felt very far away. She had been about to walk toward the bus stop when the woman called her name. Mrs. Kerrigan. One of the social workers. Tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Hair pulled back in a bun that never quite stayed tight. The woman held out a manila envelope. "This came for you," she said. "From the probate office." Isla took the envelope slowly. It was thin, light. The kind of envelope that usually held nothing important. Her name was typed across the front in blocky letters. No return address. "What is it?" Isla asked. Mrs. Kerrigan shrugged. "Legal mail. That's all I know." She turned and walked back inside, without another word. The door clicked shut again. Isla stood there holding the envelope. For a long moment she just stared at it. Then she tore it open. Inside were 3 things. A single sheet of paper with an official letterhead. A hand-drawn map on aged parchment. And a small iron key, dark with years cold and heavy in her palm. The letter was typed, formal. She read it slowly. Miss Isla Hartley. Per the last will and testament of Warren Hartley, deceased March 2023, you are designated as sole heir to parcel 447-BB in Ridgeline, Montana. Total area 40 acres. Structure unspecified. To claim ownership, unpaid property taxes in the amount of $10 must be remitted to the county assessor's office within 60 days. $10. Isla read the line again to make sure she wasn't misunderstanding. $10 to claim 40 acres of land. It didn't make sense. Land didn't cost $10. A sandwich at the gas station down the road cost more than that. Which meant one of 2 things had to be true. Either this was some kind of mistake, or the property was so worthless that no one else wanted it. She looked at the map. It was hand-drawn in pencil on paper that had yellowed with time, roads marked with careful lines, a small X in the upper corner with a note beside it, "The property." At the bottom, written in the same careful handwriting, Warren Hartley, 2006, 18 years ago. Her grandfather had drawn this map 18 years ago. Ela hadn't thought about him in a long time, not because she didn't want to, but because life in the system had a way of pushing old memories into places you didn't visit anymore. Still, she remembered fragments, small things. The smell of sawdust on his jacket, the way his hands always had calluses, the patient way he explained how to hold a hammer when she was 5 years old. He had been a builder, a man who worked with his hands, and he had never been the type to play jokes. That thought stayed with her. $10. She looked down the road again. The bus stop sat 2 blocks away. From there, she could catch a ride into the city, spend the $43 on a cheap motel for a few nights. After that, maybe a shelter. Maybe a job if she got lucky. Maybe not. That was the certain path, the one she could see clearly. The other path was less certain. Spend 10 of her $43 on a gamble, on a piece of land that might be worthless, on a map drawn by a man she barely remembered. But here was the thing about having nothing. When you have nothing, even a bad gamble looks like a choice. And choice, when you've spent 4 years being told where to sleep and when to wake up, and what your future should look like. Choice feels like something worth taking a risk for. Isla folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. She put the map in her jacket pocket. The key went into her jeans. Then she turned away from the bus stop and started walking in the opposite direction. The trip to Montana took longer than she expected. First a city bus to the downtown terminal, then a Greyhound heading north and west through state lines she'd never crossed before. The bus was half empty, vinyl seats cracked from age, the smell of stale coffee and diesel fuel. Outside the windows, the landscape changed slowly. The city disappeared first, then the suburbs. Then even the small towns began to stretch farther apart. Soon there were just fields, then forests, then mountains rising in the distance like walls. Isla sat by the window the entire time. The envelope rested in her lap. She didn't talk to anyone. No one talked to her either. And strangely, that felt okay. For the first time since leaving the youth center, she didn't feel like someone was watching, judging, deciding what her life should be. She was just another passenger heading somewhere unknown. The bus ride took 14 hours. She slept in short bursts, her head pressed against the cold glass. When she woke, the mountains were closer, taller, their peaks sharp against the sky. Somewhere past midnight, the bus pulled into a small station. The driver called out the name. Ridgeline. Isla grabbed her backpack and stepped off into the cold night air. The town was smaller than she'd imagined. A single main street. A few buildings with dark windows. A diner with a flickering neon sign that said, "Open 24 hours," but looked like it might not be. At the far end of the street, she could see a brick building with a light still on inside. A sign beside the door read, "County Offices." She walked toward it slowly. Her boots echoed on the empty sidewalk. The air smelled like pine trees and cold earth. Inside, the hallway was narrow and dim. Old wooden floors creaked under her weight. A directory on the wall listed names and room numbers. Near the bottom, Harrison and Doyle attorneys at Law Room 7. She found the door and knocked. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a voice called from inside. "Come in." The office was small. Papers stacked neatly on a desk. Behind the desk sat an older man with silver hair and round glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up as she entered. "You must be Miss Hartley," he said. Isla stopped. "How did you know?" The man smiled faintly. "We don't get many visitors at this hour, and I've been expecting you." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Isla sat down slowly, the backpack resting on her lap. The lawyer pulled a folder from a drawer and opened it. Inside were documents, maps, photographs of what looked like an old building. "Your grandfather purchased the land in 1998, the man explained. 40 acres, no utilities, no road access. The structure on the property is not registered in any county records." He slid a paper across the desk. At the top, a typed line, "Transfer fee and back taxes $10. Isla reached into her pocket. She pulled out a crumpled $10 bill and placed it on the desk. The lawyer looked at the bill, then at her. His expression softened. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. Isla met his eyes. "It's all I've got." Something shifted in the man's face. He nodded slowly and pushed the documents toward her. "Then I suppose we should make it official." She signed her name where he pointed. The pen felt light in her hand. When she finished, the lawyer closed the folder and reached into another drawer. He pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly. An old iron key, just like the one already in her pocket. Except this one had a tag attached with a string. On the tag, written in faded ink, "Front door." The lawyer slid it across the desk. "This was left with the estate," he said, "along with instructions." "What instructions?" The man hesitated. Then he pulled out one more envelope, smaller, sealed with wax. "Your grandfather left this. He said you should open it when you find what you're looking for." Isla took the envelope. The wax seal was dark red, unbroken. She looked at the lawyer. "Did you know him?" "Not well," the man said, "but I knew of him. Warren Hartley was a quiet man, kept to himself. But people here remember him as someone who kept his word." He stood and extended his hand. Isla shook it. "The property is yours now, Miss Hartley. What you do with it is your choice." She walked out of the office, holding the key and the sealed envelope. Outside, the night was quiet. The street empty. Somewhere in the mountains beyond this small town, was a piece of land that now belonged to her. And whether it was worthless or the beginning of something else entirely, she was about to find out. The directions the lawyer gave her were straightforward on paper. Follow County Road 12 for 3 miles. Turn onto Old Timber Road. Then walk. In reality, it took Isla almost 4 hours to reach the place. She started at dawn. The sun rose slowly behind the mountains, turning the sky from black to deep blue to pale gold. The air was cold enough to see her breath. Frost clung to the grass along the roadside. County Road 12 was paved but narrow. No traffic, no houses. Just pine trees on both sides and the sound of her boots on asphalt. After 3 miles, she found the turnoff. Old Timber Road looked less like a road and more like 2 faint tire tracks cutting through tall grass. The ground was soft, muddy in places. Her boots sank slightly with each step. The farther she walked, the quieter everything became. No cars, no voices. Just wind moving through the branches overhead, and the occasional call of a bird she couldn't name. Her backpack grew heavier with every step. More than once she wondered if this had been a mistake. $10 might not seem like much, but when it was almost a quarter of everything you owned, it mattered. Eventually, the tire tracks faded completely. According to the map, the property was still half a mile ahead. Isla pushed through a cluster of low bushes and stepped into a clearing. And there it was. She stopped walking. For a long moment, she just stood there staring. The structure in front of her was unlike anything she'd expected. A long, curved building made entirely of corrugated metal. The kind of building she'd seen in old photographs from World War II. A Quonset hut, she thought they were called. Half-cylinder shaped, rusted in places. The metal stained orange and brown where years of rain and snow had eaten through the surface. Weeds grew all the way up to the sides. A few of the seams had pulled apart, leaving gaps. Broken windows stared back at her like empty eyes. This was the property. This was what $10 had bought her. Isla let the backpack slide off her shoulders. It hit the ground with a soft thud. She sat down on a fallen log and just looked at the building. For a while, she didn't move, didn't think. Just sat there in the cold morning air while something heavy settled in her chest. She'd gambled. And this was what she'd won. A rusted metal shell in the middle of nowhere. No electricity, no running water, no road. Just 40 acres of forest and a building that looked like it had been forgotten for decades. She thought about the city, the shelters, the certain path she'd turned away from. Maybe that path would have been better. Maybe this had been a mistake after all. The sun climbed higher. The shadows shortened. And Isla Hartley sat on that log and felt the weight of what she'd chosen pressing down on her. But then she remembered something. A memory from when she was small. Maybe 5 or 6 years old. She'd been trying to build something with wooden blocks. A tower. It kept falling down. She kept trying. and her grandfather had sat beside her and said something she'd almost forgotten. Things that fall down aren't failures, Isla. Failures are the things you stop trying to build. She looked at the building again. It was ugly. It was broken. It was probably worthless. But it was hers. And maybe that was enough to start with. Isla stood. She picked up her backpack. Then she walked toward the structure. The front of the building had two large metal doors. They were chained together with a rusted lock. The chain looked old. The lock even older. She pulled the key from her pocket, the one the lawyer had given her, the one with the tag that said, "Front Door." She slid it into the lock. At first, nothing happened. The metal resisted. The key wouldn't turn. Isla frowned and tried again, twisting harder this time. For a second, she thought it might snap. Then suddenly a loud metallic click echoed across the clearing. The lock gave way. The chain slipped loose and fell against the doors with a hollow clang. Isla grabbed one of the handles and pulled. The door groaned. The hinges shrieked. Rust flaked off and drifted to the ground like snow. Cold air spilled out from the darkness inside, stale, untouched. She stepped cautiously through the doorway. The interior was enormous, far bigger than it had looked from outside. A single open space. The curved metal walls rose high above her head. Dim light filtered through cracks in the roof and the broken windows, cutting through dust that hung in the air like fog. The floor was concrete, cracked in places, stained, but solid. There was no furniture, no tools, no sign anyone had been here for years. Isla's shoulders sank slightly. She took a few more steps inside. Her footsteps echoed across the empty space. And then she saw it, right in the center of the floor, sitting directly beneath a single beam of sunlight that cut through a crack in the roof. A wooden crate, old, weathered, completely out of place in the empty building. Isla walked toward it slowly. Her boots echoed softly on the concrete. The crate was small, maybe 2 feet on each side. The wood was dark with age. Thick rope handles hung from the sides. The lid was gone. She crouched beside it and brushed away a thin layer of dust. Inside were rows of glass jars, mason jars, the kind people used for canning vegetables. At first she thought they were empty. Then she lifted one. It was heavy, much heavier than it should have been. Isla held it up toward the light. Inside the jar were tightly rolled bundles of paper, stacked one on top of another. Green paper. Her heart started beating faster. She unscrewed the lid carefully. The metal threads were stiff. She had to twist hard. When it finally came loose, the smell of old paper drifted out. She slid one bundle free and unrolled it. $20 bills. Dozens of them. Isla froze. Her mind refused to process what she was seeing. She grabbed another jar. then another. Every single one was the same, filled with tightly packed bundles of cash. Her hands began to shake. She sat down heavily on the cold concrete floor. The jar rested in her lap, and for a long time she just stared at the crate. There were 12 jars total, maybe more beneath the ones she could see, each one filled with money, more money than she had ever seen in her entire life. The quiet building suddenly felt different, not abandoned, not empty, but waiting, like it had been waiting for her. Isla didn't know how long she sat there. Minutes, maybe an hour. The sunlight moved across the floor as the morning stretched into afternoon. Eventually, she placed the jar back into the crate and stood. Her legs felt unsteady. She looked around the building again, at the curved metal walls, at the cracked concrete, at the single beam of light cutting through the dust. And she realized something. Her grandfather hadn't just left her land. He had been planning this for a long time. And whatever he had planned, she was only just beginning to understand it. Isla spent the rest of that first day simply existing inside the building. She didn't count the money, didn't make plans, didn't do anything except try to process what she'd found. She dragged the crate away from the center of the floor and into a corner where the shadows were deeper. Then she covered it with an old tarp she found folded against the wall, protecting it, almost instinctively. As the afternoon faded into evening, the temperature inside the building dropped. The metal walls held no warmth. Every gust of wind outside seemed to travel straight through the gaps in the seams. Isla gathered a pile of old canvas tarps and spread them across the concrete floor in another corner. It wasn't comfortable, but it was enough to keep the cold from seeping up through the ground. She sat down on the makeshift bed and pulled a thin blanket from her backpack. Then she just sat there, in the dim light, listening. The forest had its own language at night. Branches creaked. Wind whispered through the pine trees. Somewhere far away, an animal called once. Then silence. For the first time since leaving Clearwater County, Isla felt truly alone. Not the kind of alone you feel in a crowded room, but the deep kind. The kind where there's no one else for miles, where the only sounds are the ones nature makes, where if something went wrong, no one would know. Fear pressed against her chest. She was 19 years old, sleeping in a rusted building in the middle of Montana, with a crate full of money she didn't understand, and a map drawn by a man she barely remembered. What was she doing here? But then she thought about the alternative, the shelter in the city, the uncertain future, the feeling of being adrift with nowhere to anchor. This place might be broken. It might be cold. It might be isolated. But it was hers. And there was something about that word, hers, something she'd never really been able to say before. Isla pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She leaned back against the cold metal wall and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would figure out what to do. Tonight she would just survive. Morning came slowly. A thin beam of sunlight slipped through the crack in the roof and stretched across the floor until it reached her face. Isla blinked awake. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then the curved metal ceiling came into focus above her, and the memory of the crate full of money returned all at once. She sat up quickly. The tarp still covered the crate in the corner. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. She stood and walked to the doorway. Outside, the forest looked peaceful in the pale morning light. Pine trees surrounded the clearing in every direction. Their tall trunks glowed gold where the sun touched them. The air was cold but clean. Isla inhaled deeply. For a moment, standing there in the doorway of the rusted building with 40 acres of Montana forest stretching out in front of her, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, but something close to it. A sense that maybe, just maybe, this crazy gamble might turn into something real. But reality returned quickly. She needed food, water, a way to make the building livable. And most importantly, she needed to understand where the money had come from. Isla walked back inside and uncovered the crate. She knelt beside it and carefully removed the jars one by one, placing them on the concrete floor. 12 jars total. She counted the bundles in the first jar. 50 $20 bills. $1,000. If each jar held the same amount, that was $12,000. But when she lifted the second jar, it felt heavier. She opened it. More bundles. More money. She kept going. Jar after jar, each one filled differently, some with $20 bills, some with 50s, one with hundreds. By the time she'd counted everything, the total came to something she could barely believe. $180,000. Isla sat back on her heels and stared at the rows of jars lined up on the floor. This wasn't just savings. This was a fortune. And then she saw it. At the bottom of the crate, beneath the straw lining where the jars had rested, something else. A leather notebook. The cover was worn, darkened with age. Embossed in faded gold letters across the front was a name. Warren Hartley. Her grandfather's journal. Isla picked it up carefully. The leather felt soft under her fingers. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat, precise, written in black ink that had faded to brown. Isla. Just her name at the top of the page, and then below it a letter. If you're reading this, it means two things. First, it means you made it to 19. And second, it means you were curious enough to open the crate. That makes me smile. Isla felt something tighten in her chest. She kept reading. You probably think the money is the important part of what I left you. It isn't. The money is just a tool. What matters is the land. People will tell you this place isn't worth much. They'll say it's too far from town, too rough, too forgotten. Let them believe that. But if you're reading this, it means you now have something no one else can take away from you. a place to stand, a place to build. Isla lowered the journal slowly. Her eyes drifted around the massive empty building, the rusted walls, the cracked concrete floor, the dust floating lazily in the beam of sunlight. A place to stand. Until that moment, she had been thinking about survival, where to sleep, how to make the building warmer, what to do with the money. But now, for the first time, she was thinking about something else entirely. A future. Her grandfather hadn't left her money so she could run away. He had left it so she could build something real. Something that couldn't be taken away. Isla turned the page. The next entries were different. Not letters, just notes, sketches, measurements, ideas written in the same careful handwriting. Plans for the building. How to reinforce the roof. Where to add insulation. How to frame interior walls. Where to install windows and doors. He had thought about this place for years, maybe decades. And suddenly the old rusted building didn't look quite so hopeless anymore. It looked like a beginning. Isla spent the rest of the morning reading through the journal, page after page of her grandfather's plans, his thoughts, his dreams for what this place could become. But it was the entries near the middle that stopped her. They weren't about the building. They were about money. The first entry was dated April 2006. Started saving today. Rosalie is gone. Isla is in foster care. The system won't let me have her. Too old, they say. Not enough income. So I'll save. Every dollar. Every day. Until she's old enough to need it. Isla read the words again. Rosalie, her mother, gone. She turned the page, more entries, each one with a date and an amount. June 2006. Fixed the Henderson porch, made $350, saved $300. August 2006. Built deck for the Kowalskis. Made $800, saved $700. December 2006. Repaired 3 roofs this month. Made $1,200. Saved $1,100. The pattern continued. Page after page. Year after year. Every job. Every dollar earned. Almost all of it saved. And at the end of each year, a single line. Total saved this year, $6,000. For Allah. Ila's hands trembled as she turned the pages. The entries went on. 2007, 2008, 2010, 2015, 2020. The amounts grew larger each year. Not because he was charging more, but because he was spending less. An entry from 2014 said, lived on $800 this month. Saved $1,400. Ela is 9 years old now. I wonder if she remembers me. Another from 2018. Cut my own expenses to $600 per month. Ela is 13. I hope she's safe. The last entry was dated February 2023. just 1 month before he died. 48 years of work. 48 years of building things for other people. And now, finally, I've built something for the person who matters most. This land, this building, this money. It's all for Ela. I won't be there to see what she does with it. But I believe in her. I believe she'll build something beautiful. Ela closed the journal slowly. She sat there on the cold concrete floor, with the jars of money surrounding her, and her grandfather's words echoing in her mind. And for the first time since arriving at this place, she understood. This wasn't just about survival. This was about legacy, about sacrifice, about a man who had spent nearly 2 decades working and saving so his granddaughter would have one thing he never had: a foundation, a place to stand, a chance to build something that belonged to her. Tears didn't come, not the kind that fell, but the kind that pressed against the back of her eyes and made her throat tight. She looked at the jars, at the journal, at the building around her, and she made a decision. She wouldn't waste this. She wouldn't take the easy path. She wouldn't sell the land or spend the money on things that didn't matter. She would do exactly what her grandfather had believed she could do. She would build. The walk back to Ridgeline took less time than the walk out. Ela moved faster now, with purpose. She had taken one jar from the crate. $1,000 in $20 bills wrapped carefully and tucked into her backpack. The rest stayed hidden in the building, protected. Ridgeline looked busier in daylight. A pickup truck rumbled past the diner. Someone swept the sidewalk outside a general store. An older man sat on a bench reading a newspaper. Ela found the hardware store near the end of the main street. The sign above the door said, "Brennan's Hardware, established 1982. A small bell chimed as she pushed the door open. The store smelled like wood shavings and machine oil. Shelves were stacked high with tools, rope nails, and equipment she barely recognized. Hammers hung on pegboards. Saws lined one wall. Bags of concrete mix were stacked near the back. Behind the counter stood a man in his 60s. Gray hair, weathered hands, eyes that looked like they'd seen a lot of years. He glanced up from a newspaper and studied her for a moment. "Morning," he said. Ela stepped forward. "Morning." The man folded the newspaper and set it aside. He looked at her backpack, her worn boots, the uncertainty in her posture. "You fixin' something?" he asked. Ela hesitated, trying to. "What kind of place?" She paused, then said quietly, "An old building, out past Old Timber Road." For a moment, the man's eyebrows lifted slightly. "You mean the old Hartley property?" Ela blinked. "You know it." The man chuckled softly. "Everybody around here knows that place." He stepped around the counter. Warren Hartley bought that land back in the 90s, worked on it every weekend for years. Then one day he just stopped coming to town. The man extended his hand. "Name's Archer Brennan. This is my shop." Isla shook his hand. Isla Hartley. Archer's expression shifted. Something like recognition, maybe respect. "Warren's granddaughter," he said quietly. "I heard you might be coming." "You knew him?" "Not well, but I knew of him. He bought supplies here for 20 years, always paid in cash, always said thank you. Fixed my store roof in 2012 when nobody else would take the job." Archer looked at her carefully. "If someone's finally going to finish what Warren started, we'd better make sure you've got the right tools." And for the first time since arriving in Montana, Ela realized something important. She might not be as alone out here as she thought. Archer Brennan didn't ask questions. That was the first thing Isla noticed about him. He didn't ask where she'd been living or how much money she had or what her plans were. He just walked her through the store, pointing at tools and explaining what each one did. "You'll need a good hammer," he said, lifting one from the wall. "Not the cheap kind, something with weight, something that'll last." He placed it in her hands. The handle was smooth wood. The head was solid steel. It felt heavier than she expected. "Feel that balance?" Archer asked. "That's what you want. A tool that does the work with you, not against you." Isla nodded. She didn't know what he meant yet, but she would. Archer moved down the aisle. "Measuring tape, level, carpenter's square. You'll use these more than anything else." He pulled each item from the shelves and set them on the counter. "And you'll need a handsaw. Circular saw if you've got power out there. But I'm guessing you don't." "No power," Isla confirmed. "Handsaw then. And you'll need to learn how to sharpen it. Dull blade is worse than no blade." He kept going. Nails, screws, a manual drill, sandpaper in different grits, work gloves, safety glasses. When he finally stopped, the counter was covered with tools. Archer tallied the cost on a piece of paper. "Comes to $470. Isla pulled $500 bills from her pocket. Archer took them without comment. He counted out the change and handed it to her. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a worn paperback book. The cover was faded. The title read, "Basic Carpentry, a Beginner's Guide." He slid it across the counter. On the house. Isla looked at the book, then at him. "Thank you." Archer nodded once. Warren was a good man. If you're out there trying to finish what he started, that means something. He helped her load everything into a cardboard box. It was heavy. Isla hoisted it onto her shoulder and headed for the door. "Miss Hartley," Archer called. She stopped and turned. "Building something takes time," he said. "Don't expect it to happen fast. And don't expect it to happen easy." Isla met his eyes. "I won't." She walked out into the afternoon sun. The box weighed maybe 40 pounds. By the time she reached the edge of town, her shoulder ached. By the time she turned onto Old Timber Road, her arms were shaking. But she didn't put it down. She kept walking, one step at a time, until she reached the clearing and set the box down on the concrete floor of the building. Then she sat down beside it and looked at the tools. This was the beginning. This was where the real work started, and she had absolutely no idea what she was doing. The first week was harder than Ela ever imagined. She started with the book Archer had given her. She read it cover to cover in 2 days. Then she read it again. The words made sense on the page, but when she picked up the tools and tried to apply what she'd learned, everything fell apart. The first thing she attempted was simple. Build a workbench. Just a flat surface to set things on. 4 legs atop some cross supports. She measured the lumber, cut the pieces with the handsaw. The cuts weren't straight. The blade kept binding. Her arms burned from the effort. When she finally had all the pieces cut, she tried to assemble them. The legs wobbled. The top didn't sit level. The whole thing looked like it might collapse if she put any weight on it. She stepped back and stared at it. Then she kicked it, hard. The bench tipped over and crashed to the floor. Ela stood there, breathing hard. Her hands were covered in blisters. Her shoulders ached. And she had just spent an entire day building something that didn't work. She sat down on the concrete and put her head in her hands. This was impossible. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't have the skills. She didn't have the experience. Maybe this whole thing had been a mistake. But then she remembered the journal. Her grandfather's words. Things that fall down aren't failures. Failures are the things you stop trying to build. Ela looked at the collapsed bench. Then she stood up. She picked up the pieces. And she started again. The second attempt wasn't much better. But it was a little better. The cuts were slightly straighter. The legs wobbled less. The third attempt actually stood on its own. By the end of the first week, she had a workbench that was functional. Not pretty. Not perfect. But functional. And that felt like a victory. The second week, she focused on cleaning. The building was filled with debris, old tarps, broken glass, rusted metal scraps, piles of dirt and leaves that had blown in through the gaps. She spent 3 days just hauling trash out of the building and stacking it in a pile outside. Then she swept. The concrete floor was stained and cracked, but under all the dirt it was solid. She swept until her back ached, until the dust made her cough, until the floor was as clean as it was gonna get. When she stepped back and looked at the empty space, it felt different. Not abandoned anymore, not forgotten. It felt like something that could be reclaimed. The third week she started on the walls. According to her grandfather's journal, the first step was framing interior divisions. The building was one massive open space. To make it livable, she needed to section off areas. A bedroom, a kitchen, a workshop. She studied the sketches in the journal, measured the floor, marked lines with chalk. Then she cut lumber for the first wall frame. This was harder than the workbench. The pieces were longer, heavier. She had to hold them in place while she drilled pilot holes and drove screws. Her arms shook from the effort. The first wall frame took her 2 full days. When she finally stood it up, it leaned to the left. She measured again, checked the level, realized she'd cut one of the vertical supports 3 inches too short. The wall was unusable. Isla sat down and stared at it. 2 days of work, wasted. She thought about giving up, about walking away, about taking the money and leaving this place behind. But she didn't. Instead, she took the frame apart, salvaged the pieces she could, cut new lumber for the parts she couldn't, and she built it again. The second wall took a day and a half, and when she stood it up, it was straight. Isla stepped back and looked at it. A single wall, 8 feet tall, perfectly vertical. It wasn't much, but it was progress. And progress, she was learning, was all that mattered. By the end of the 3rd week, Isla had built 3 wall frames. They divided one corner of the building into what would eventually be a bedroom. She hadn't installed drywall yet, hadn't insulated, hadn't done any of the finishing work, but the bones were there. The structure was taking shape, and something else was happening too, something she hadn't expected. She was getting stronger. Not just physically, though, that was part of it. Her hands had developed calluses. Her arms could lift heavier loads without shaking. Her back didn't ache quite as much at the end of the day. But it was more than that. She was getting stronger in other ways, more confident, more capable, more willing to try things she didn't know how to do. When a saw blade broke, she didn't panic. She figured out how to replace it. When she cut a board wrong, she didn't waste time being frustrated. She just cut another one. When something didn't work, she tried a different approach. Failure was becoming less frightening, because failure wasn't permanent. It was just information, just another step in the process of learning. And slowly, piece by piece, board by board, the building was transforming. It was the beginning of the 4th week when Isla found the box. She had gone outside to stack some scrap lumber when she noticed it. A cardboard box sitting near the front entrance of the building. It hadn't been there the night before. Isla walked over slowly. The box was old. The cardboard soft from moisture, but it was sealed with tape. She looked around the clearing. No one was there. No footprints in the soft dirt except her own. She picked up the box and carried it inside. Then she opened it carefully. Inside were dishes, mismatched plates and bowls, a few mugs, some silverware, all of it old but clean. At the bottom of the box was a cast iron skillet, heavy, well seasoned, the kind of skillet that had cooked 1,000 meals. There was no note, no name, just the dishes. Isla stared at them for a long moment. Someone had left this. Someone from town. Someone who knew she was out here and thought she might need these things. She lifted the skillet. The weight of it felt solid in her hands, and for the first time since arriving at the property, she felt something shift inside her chest. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't forgotten. Someone had noticed. Someone cared. That night, Isla cooked her first real meal in the building. Just rice and canned beans heated on a small camp stove she'd bought in town. But she ate it off one of the plates from the box, and it tasted better than any meal she'd had in months. Not because the food was good, but because it felt like belonging. The work continued. Days blurred together in a rhythm of measuring, cutting, building, and adjusting. She installed the first window. It took her an entire day to cut the opening in the metal wall and frame it properly. The window was salvaged, single-pane glass, old but intact. When she finally got it mounted and sealed, light poured through into the building in a way it hadn't before. She stood inside and watched the sunlight spread across the floor. It was a small thing, one window, but it changed everything. The building felt less like a shell and more like a place where someone could live. Next came the roof repairs. The biggest crack ran along the top curve of the structure for about 6 feet. Rain came through when it stormed. Cold air poured in at night. Isla studied the problem. Then she went to town and bought a roll of heavy tarp roofing cement and metal patching strips. The repair took 3 days. Climbing up on the curved roof was terrifying. The metal was slippery, the angle steep. One wrong step and she'd slide right off. But she moved slowly, carefully. She patched the crack from the outside with the metal strips, sealed everything with cement, then reinforced it with the tarp from the inside. When the next rain came, she sat inside and listened, waiting for the drip, the leak. But it didn't come. The roof held. Isla smiled. Actually smiled. The first real smile she'd felt since arriving. She was doing this. Actually doing it. It was mid-morning on a Tuesday when the truck pulled up. Isla was outside cutting lumber when she heard the engine. She looked up to see an old Ford pickup rolling slowly down the dirt track toward the clearing. The truck stopped. The engine cut off. And a man stepped out. He was older, maybe 70. Thin but sturdy looking. He wore canvas work pants and a flannel shirt. A tool belt hung from his waist. Isla set down the saw and walked toward him. "Morning," the man said. "Morning." He looked past her at the building, at the new window, at the stacks of lumber, at the work she'd been doing. "Heard someone was fixing up the old Hartley place," he said. "Wanted to see for myself." "It's mine now," Isla said. Not defensive, just stating fact. The man nodded. "I'm Donovan. Used to do electrical work before I retired. Archer mentioned you might need some help with wiring at some point." Isla blinked. "Archer sent you?" "Didn't send me, just mentioned it. Thought I'd stop by." Donovan gestured toward the building. "Mind if I take a look?" Isla hesitated, then nodded. Donovan walked around the structure slowly. He studied the walls, the roof, the windows. He stepped inside and looked at the framing Isla had built. When he came back out, he was nodding. "You're doing good work," he said. "Real good work. especially for someone learning as they go. How did you know I'm learning? Donovan smiled slightly. Because I can see where you made mistakes and fixed them. That's how you know someone's learning. They don't hide the mistakes. They correct them and move forward. He walked back to his truck and pulled out a cardboard box from the bed. Brought you some wire, outlets, a couple of junction boxes. Nothing fancy. But if you're going to run electricity eventually, you'll need these. He set the box on the ground near the building entrance. Isla stared at it. I can't pay you for this right now. Donovan waved a hand. Not asking you to. Your granddad helped my brother fix his barn back in 2015. Didn't charge him a dime. Said neighbors help neighbors. He looked at Isla. Far as I'm concerned, you're a neighbor now. He climbed back into his truck, started the engine. You keep working hard, he said through the open window. And if you need advice on the electrical, you know where to find me. Then he drove away. Isla stood there watching the dust settle on the dirt road. She looked at the box of electrical supplies. And she understood something then. Something important. This wasn't charity. This was respect. She had earned this, not by asking for it, not by needing it, but by showing up every day and doing the work. By proving she was serious. The community was watching, and they were responding, not with pity, but with recognition. The work became easier after that, not because the tasks themselves got simpler, but because Isla felt less alone in doing them. A week after Donovan's visit, the woman who ran the diner stopped by. She brought sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. She didn't stay long, just handed them to Isla and said, "You look like you could use a hot meal." Another week later, a rancher drove past in his truck. He stopped and asked if Isla needed scrap lumber. He had a barn he was tearing down. The wood was old, but still good. She could have it if she hauled it away. Isla spent 2 days loading lumber into a borrowed trailer and bringing it back to the property. By the time she was done, she had enough wood to frame out 3 more walls and build a proper front porch. None of these people asked for anything in return. They just gave. Quietly. Without fanfare. And Isla worked harder because of it. Because she didn't want to waste what they'd offered. Because she wanted to prove they hadn't made a mistake in helping her. The walls went up faster now. She had a rhythm, a process. Measure, cut, assemble, install, repeat. The bedroom corner was fully framed. She'd added insulation salvaged from the rancher's barn, covered the studs with plywood she'd bought in town. It wasn't finished, but it was enclosed. Private. A room. Next came the kitchen area. She framed a corner near the back of the building, ran a water line from the spring Archer had told her about. It took her 3 days to dig the trench and lay the pipe. But when she finally turned the valve and water flowed out of the hand pump she'd installed, it felt like magic. Running water. Cold, yes, but clean. Reliable. She could wash dishes now, cook properly, drink without hauling bottles from town. The building was becoming functional, not just a shelter, but a home. It was late afternoon when Isla found the hidden pages. She'd been reading through the journal again, looking for guidance on how to frame the workshop area. She was flipping through the middle section when she noticed something. 2 pages stuck together, glued at the edges. She hadn't noticed it before because the glue had darkened to match the paper. But now, holding the journal up to the light, she could see there was something between those pages. Carefully, she worked a knife blade along the edge. The glue was old, brittle. It gave way slowly. When the pages finally separated, a folded piece of paper fell out. Isla unfolded it. It was another drawing, but not like the rough sketches in the rest of the journal. This was detailed, precise, a full architectural plan. And it wasn't just for a workshop. It was a complete home. The blueprint showed the entire interior of the building divided into spaces. Not just a bedroom and kitchen, but a master bedroom. A second, smaller bedroom. A bathroom with a shower. A living area. A full workshop with tool storage and a workbench. Everything was labeled, dimensioned, thought through. At the bottom of the page, a date January 2006, and a note in her grandfather's handwriting. Began this the day Rosalie left, for the day Isla comes home. Isla stared at the blueprint. 18 years ago. Her grandfather had drawn this 18 years ago, before she'd even known this place existed, before she'd aged out of foster care, before she'd had any idea where her life would lead. He'd been planning, hoping, believing that someday she would find her way here, and he'd designed a home for her, not just a shelter, a home, complete with a second bedroom. Isla looked at that room on the blueprint. It was small, maybe 10 by 10, with a window facing east. The label beside it said, "Guest room/future." She ran her finger over the words. Her grandfather had imagined a future for her. One where she wouldn't be alone, where she might have friends, family, people who would visit and stay and be part of her life. He'd believed in that future even when she couldn't see it herself. Isla folded the blueprint carefully. She slid it back into the journal. Then she looked around the building, at the walls she'd built, at the spaces taking shape. She'd been working from the rough sketches, building what seemed necessary, what seemed practical. But now she had the real plan, the complete vision, and she understood what she needed to do. She wasn't just fixing up a building anymore. She was building a home. The home her grandfather had imagined for her. And she was going to finish it. The next 2 months passed in a blur of work. Isla followed the blueprint exactly. She framed the master bedroom according to the dimensions, built the bathroom enclosure with space for the shower, and composting toilet she'd researched. She constructed the workshop area with pegboard walls for tool storage and a heavy-duty workbench built from the salvaged barn lumber. The living area took shape near the front of the building. She installed 2 more windows there. The light that came through turned the space warm and welcoming. Every day she worked from sunrise until her hands were too tired to hold tools. Then she cooked simple meals on the camp stove, read sections of the journal by lamplight, slept on the floor wrapped in blankets. And every morning she woke up and started again. Summer arrived. The Montana wilderness exploded with green. Wildflowers bloomed in the clearing. Birds sang in the pine trees. And the building transformed. The rusted exterior was still rough, still weathered. But the inside was becoming something else entirely. Walls painted white, floors swept clean, windows that let in sunlight, spaces that had purpose and function. Ela installed the wood stove in the living area. It was the same stove that had been buried under debris when she'd first arrived. She'd spent 2 days cleaning it, scrubbing the rust, replacing the door gasket, polishing the cast iron until it shone. When she finally connected the stovepipe and lit the first fire, smoke rose straight up through the chimney she'd built. The heat spread through the building slowly, warm, steady, real. Isla sat in front of the stove and watched the flames dance behind the glass door. This was her home now. Not just a building, not just shelter. Home. And it felt like the most valuable thing she'd ever owned. One evening in late July, Isla was working on the front porch when she heard footsteps. She looked up to see Archer walking down the path from the road. "Thought I'd check on your progress," he said. Isla wiped her hands on her jeans and stood. "Want to see inside?" Archer nodded. She led him through the front door, the wooden door she'd built and hung herself. It swung smoothly on new hinges. Inside, Archer stopped and looked around. The transformation was complete enough now that the space read as rooms rather than just frame sections. The bedroom had a door. The kitchen had counters and the working hand pump. The bathroom was enclosed. The workshop had tools hung neatly on the walls. Archer walked slowly through each area. He didn't say anything, just looked, studied, ran his hand along the walls. When he came back to the living area, he stood there for a moment. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said quietly. Isla felt something tight in her throat. "You think so? I know so." Archer looked at her. Warren spent 40 years building things for other people. He was good at it, honest, hard-working. But I don't think he ever got to build something that mattered this much. He gestured around the room. "This mattered. And you finished it." Isla shook her head. "It's not finished. There's still so much to do." "It's finished enough," Archer said. "Finished enough to live in. Finished enough to call home." He pulled something from his pocket and handed it to her. It was a small wooden sign, carved letters painted black. It read, "Hartley." "Every home needs a name," Archer said. Isla took the sign. The wood was smooth, the letters carved deep and clean. "Thank you," she said. Archer nodded once. Then he walked back outside. Isla followed him to the porch. She watched him head down the path toward the road. Then she looked at the sign in her hands. Hartley. Her name. Her grandfather's name. Their name. She found a hammer and nails, and she mounted the sign beside the front door. When she stepped back and looked at it, something settled inside her. This place had a name now, an identity. It belonged to her, and she belonged to it. That night, Isla sat on the porch in one of the chairs she'd built. The sun was setting behind the mountains. The sky turned orange and purple. The air smelled like pine and earth. She opened the journal to the last page her grandfather had written. Strong foundation matters more than anything you build on top of it. She understood now. Really understood. The foundation wasn't just the land. Wasn't just the concrete floor or the money in the jars. The foundation was her. The person she was becoming. The skills she was learning. The strength she was building. Everything else, the walls and the roof and the rooms, was just what she was building on top of that foundation. And that foundation was solid now. Tested. Proven. She closed the journal, looked out at the forest, at the home she'd built with her own hands. And for the first time in her life, Isla Hartley felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. By the time late summer arrived, the building had changed so completely that Isla barely recognized it as the same structure she'd found 6 months earlier. The rusted metal exterior still showed its age. Streaks of orange and brown where weather had worn through the surface. But the inside was different. Warm. Lived in. Real. The walls were painted. The floors were clean. Sunlight poured through 6 windows now instead of broken gaps. The wood stove stood in the center of the living area, its black pipe rising straight through a properly sealed opening in the roof. Isla had running water from the spring, a functioning kitchen with counters she'd built from salvaged wood, a bedroom with a real door and a bed frame she'd constructed herself, a bathroom that was simple but complete. The building was no longer just shelter. It was home. She stood in the doorway one evening as the sun dropped behind the western ridge. The air had started to cool, not cold yet, but cooler than it had been. The change of seasons approaching. Isla walked back inside and looked at the crate in the corner. She'd moved it weeks ago into the bedroom for safety. The tarp still covered it. She pulled the tarp away and looked at the jars. 12 of them. Still sitting exactly as she'd arranged them months ago after counting the money. She'd used less than $15,000 total. Tools, materials, supplies. She'd been careful, deliberate, only buying what she truly needed. That left more than $160,000 still saved. Isla lifted the first jar, held it up to the lamplight. That's when she noticed something she hadn't seen before. On the bottom of the jar, written in faded marker, was a date, 2006. She set that jar down and picked up the next one, 2007. Her heart started beating faster. She checked the rest. Every jar had a date on the bottom: 2008, 2009, 2010, all the way through 2023, one jar for each year. Isla sat down on the floor and arranged them in chronological order. Then she opened the first jar again, the one marked 2006. Inside, along with the money, was a small folded piece of paper she hadn't noticed before. It had been tucked down the side of the glass. She unfolded it carefully. Warren's handwriting, just a few lines. April 2006. Rosalie left yesterday. She's 17. Pregnant. Scared. I tried to help, but she ran. The baby was born in Denver. A girl. Isla. The state took her. They won't let me have her. Too old, they say. Not enough income. So I start saving today. First jar. For Isla. $6,000 this year. Ila's hands trembled. She opened the next jar. Another note. December 2007. Isla is 2 years old. I saw her once through a window at the foster home. She was playing with blocks. She looked happy. I wanted to go in, but they won't let me. Saved $9,000 this year. Living on less, working more. Isla opened jar after jar. Each one had a note. Each note told a piece of the story. 2010. Isla is 5. I haven't seen her in 3 years, but I keep saving. $14,000 this year. 2011. Isla is 10. I wonder what she looks like now. If she remembers me. I built the bedroom this year. In case she ever comes home. Saved $16,000. 2012. Isla is 15. 3 more years until she ages out. I'm getting older. My hands don't work like they used to. But I keep building. Keep saving. $18,000 this year. 2013. This is my last jar. I can feel it. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less. Isla will be 19 soon. She'll age out. She'll get the letter. She'll find this place. And when she does, she'll know I never stopped thinking about her. Never stopped working for her. This money isn't wealth. It's time. Every dollar is an hour I worked instead of rested. A meal I didn't eat. A comfort I didn't take. It's 48 years of labor turned into a future for her. $22,000 this year. My last gift. Isla sat surrounded by the open jars, the notes spread out on the floor around her. She read them again, all of them, cover to cover. And she understood something she hadn't fully grasped before. The money wasn't just savings. It was sacrifice. Every single dollar represented something her grandfather had given up. Some comfort he'd denied himself. Some easier path he hadn't taken. For 18 years, he had lived like a monk, working every job he could find, saving almost everything he made, all for a granddaughter he rarely saw, for a future he wouldn't live to witness. Isla picked up the last note. The one from 2023. My last gift. But it wasn't his last gift. The money wasn't even the real gift. The real gift was this: the knowledge that someone had believed in her, had worked for her, had sacrificed for her, even when she didn't know he existed, even when the world had labeled her as unwanted. He had wanted her, had prepared for her, had built for her, and that changed everything. Isla carefully folded each note and placed it back in its jar. She sealed the lids, put the jars back in the crate. Then she sat there in the quiet of her bedroom and felt the weight of what she'd been given. Not money, not land, but love. The kind of love that works in silence, that builds in secret, that saves and plans and hopes without ever asking for recognition. That was the real inheritance, and it was worth more than all the money in the world. Autumn came to Montana like a slow exhale. The air turned crisp. The aspens on the hillsides began to change color, gold and orange spreading through the green like fire. Isla spent September preparing the building for winter. She'd lived through a Montana summer now. Hot days and cool nights. Afternoon thunderstorms that rolled through the mountains with lightning that lit up the entire sky. But winter would be different. Harder. Colder. She sealed every gap in the walls. Installed weather stripping around the doors and windows. Added extra insulation to the bedroom and bathroom. She stacked firewood under a lean-to she'd built on the north side of the building. Cord after cord of split pine and fir. She'd learned how to use an axe properly now. How to read the grain of the wood. How to split it clean with one good swing. The work felt meditative, repetitive. The kind of work that let her mind wander while her body stayed busy. She thought about her grandfather, about the years he'd spent working, saving, building. She thought about the community in Ridgeline, the quiet help they'd given, the respect they'd shown. She thought about the future, about what came next. And she realized something. She was happy here. Actually happy. Not the loud kind of happiness, not excitement or thrill, but the quiet kind, the deep kind, the kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. It was a Tuesday morning in early October when the truck pulled up. Isla was on the roof patching a small leak when she heard the engine. She climbed down and walked around to the front of the building. A new truck. Clean. Expensive looking. Not like the work trucks the locals drove. A man stepped out. Younger. Maybe 35. Wearing clothes that looked too clean for Montana wilderness. Pressed khakis. A collared shirt. Sunglasses. "Miss Hartley," he called. Isla walked closer. "That's me." The man extended his hand. "My name is Connor Webb. I'm a land developer from Billings." Isla didn't shake his hand, just waited. Webb lowered his hand and smiled. The kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've been doing some research on properties in this area," he said. "This region is about to see significant growth. New highway expansion, tourist development. Property values are going to increase dramatically. He gestured at the building, at the forest around them. I'd like to make you an offer for this land. Isla crossed her arms. It's not for sale. I understand, but hear me out. You've done impressive work here, really impressive. But this place is remote. No power lines, no paved access, limited water. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I'm prepared to offer you $150,000. Cash. You could take that money and buy a real house in town, with electricity and plumbing and neighbors. He held out the paper. Isla didn't take it. This is a real house, she said quietly. And I have neighbors. Webb's smile thinned. Miss Hartley, I understand you have sentimental attachment. But sentiment doesn't keep you warm in winter. Sentiment doesn't pay bills. Neither does selling something that's not for sale. Webb's expression hardened slightly. You're making a mistake. This is a generous offer. More than generous for 40 acres of undeveloped land. Then why do you want it? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What? If it's undeveloped and remote and has no value, why do you want to buy it? Webb recovered quickly. I see potential. That's what I do. I see what places could become. Isla looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the building. Miss Hartley, Webb called. This offer won't last forever. Isla stopped at the door, turned back. Good, she said, because my answer won't change. She went inside and closed the door behind her. Through the window, she watched Webb stand there for another minute. Then he got back in his truck and drove away. Isla sat down on the chair she'd built and looked around the room. $150,000. That was more than she'd ever imagined having. Enough to buy a house in town, a car, a completely different life. A year ago, she would have taken that offer without hesitation. But now she looked at the walls she'd built with her own hands, the windows she'd installed, the stove she'd restored, the floor she'd swept and cleaned 100 times. She looked at the workbench in the corner, the tools hanging on their pegs, the lumber stacked and ready for the next project. This wasn't just a building. It was proof. Proof that she could do hard things. Proof that she could learn and grow and become someone different than the girl who'd left foster care with $43 and nowhere to go. This place had given her something money couldn't buy. It had given her herself. And that wasn't for sale, not at any price. The rejection of Webb's offer changed something in how Ridgeline saw Isla. Before, she'd been the girl fixing up the old Hartley place, an outsider trying to make something work. Now she was someone who'd turned down good money to stay. That meant something to people. It meant she'd chosen this place, chosen them, and they responded. The invitations started small. Sarah from the diner asked if Isla wanted to join the Thursday evening knitting circle at the library. Isla didn't know how to knit, but she went anyway. Sarah taught her the basics, showed her how to hold the needles, how to loop the yarn. Isla sat with 5 women ranging from 40 to 70. They talked about weather and gossip and local news. And they included her, asked her opinion, treated her like she belonged. A week later, the rancher who'd given her the barn lumber stopped by with his teenage son. The boy's name was Lucas, 15, quiet. The rancher asked if Isla would be willing to teach Lucas some basic carpentry. The kid needed to learn how to work with his hands. Isla said yes. For the next month, Lucas came by twice a week. Isla taught him what she knew: how to measure, how to cut straight, how to join pieces properly. The kid was a fast learner. By the end of October, they'd built a small storage shed together behind the main building. When it was finished, Lucas stood back and looked at it with an expression Isla recognized: pride. The kind that comes from building something real. "I built that," he said quietly. "You did." Isla confirmed. The kid smiled. Then he helped her clean up the tools and headed home. Isla watched him go, and she realized something. She wasn't just receiving help anymore. She was giving it, contributing, becoming part of the fabric of this small community. That shift felt significant, like she'd crossed some invisible line from outsider to insider, from stranger to neighbor. Winter arrived in November with the first real snowfall. Isla woke one morning to find the clearing covered in 6 inches of white. The pine trees heavy with it. The world transformed into something quiet and clean. She built a fire in the wood stove, made coffee on the propane burner in the kitchen, stood at the window watching the snow fall. The building was warm, sealed against the cold. The insulation and weather stripping doing their job. She'd prepared for this, and now that it was here, she felt ready. Over the next weeks, the snow deepened, 1 foot, then 2 feet. The road became impassable except on foot or snowmobile. Isla didn't mind. She had firewood, food, water from the spring that ran year-round. She spent the long winter evenings reading, building furniture, planning improvements for spring. And every night she wrote in the journal, her own entries now continuing where her grandfather had left off. She wrote about the work she'd done, the things she'd learned, the mistakes she'd made and corrected. She wrote about the community, about Archer and Sarah and Donovan and all the others who'd helped without asking for anything in return. She wrote about what this place meant to her, how it had changed her, how it had given her something she'd never had before: a home, a purpose, a self she could be proud of. The winter passed slowly but not unhappily, and when spring finally began to show itself in late March, when the snow started to melt and the first green shoots appeared in the clearing, Isla stood on her porch and realized something. She'd been here for 1 full year, 12 months since she'd walked out of that youth center with $43 and nowhere to go. 12 months since she'd gambled 10 of those dollars on a piece of land she'd never seen. And in those 12 months, she'd built a life, a real one, the kind she'd never thought possible. She walked inside and picked up the journal, opened it to a blank page near the back. Then she wrote, "Grandpa Warren, I understand now. You didn't leave me money or land. You left me something bigger. You left me a foundation, the ability to stand on my own ground and build my own life. That's the real gift. Not the dollars in the jars, not the acres in the forest, but the knowledge that I could do this, that I was capable, that I was worth the sacrifice you made. This place taught me who I could be, and that's worth more than anything. Thank you for believing in me before I could believe in myself, for building this foundation, for giving me the chance to become someone I can be proud of. I'll take care of this place, and someday when I'm old like you were, maybe I'll pass it forward too. Until then, I'll just keep building, one board at a time. Love, Isla." She closed the journal, set it on the shelf she'd built. Then she walked outside into the spring morning and got back to work. April brought rain that melted the last of the snow. The clearing turned muddy. The forest came alive with birdsong. Isla planted a garden, turned the soil in a sunny patch near the south side of the building, put in seeds for vegetables, carrots, lettuce, tomatoes, things she could grow and eat. She built a chicken coop from leftover lumber and bought 6 hens from a farmer in Ridgeline. The chickens provided eggs and also company, something alive to care for besides herself. She expanded the porch, made it wide enough for a small table and 2 chairs, a place to sit in the evening and watch the sun set behind the mountains. She was working on that porch one afternoon when she saw someone walking up the road. Not a truck this time, just a person on foot, small, young. Isla set down her hammer and watched. The figure got closer. A girl, maybe 18, thin, wearing a backpack that looked too big for her frame. The girl stopped at the edge of the clearing, looked at the building, at Isla standing on the porch. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the girl took a hesitant step forward. "Is this the Hartley place?" she called. Isla nodded. "It is." The girl came closer. She looked exhausted, like she'd been walking for a long time. Her boots were worn, her jeans muddy at the cuffs. "I'm sorry to bother you," the girl said. "I was in Ridgeline, at the library. I was looking for places to sleep and someone mentioned there was a woman out here who'd fixed up an old building. They said maybe you might have work, or know someone who did." Isla studied the girl, saw something familiar in her eyes, something she recognized because she'd seen it in her own reflection not long ago. Lost, alone, trying. "What's your name?" Isla asked. "Maya." "How old are you, Maya?" 18, as of last week. "You age out of foster care." Maya's eyes widened slightly. "How did you know?" Isla smiled gently. "Lucky guess." She looked at the girl standing there in her muddy boots. at the too big backpack, at the uncertainty written across her face, and she made a decision. I might have work, Isla said, if you're willing to learn. Maya straightened. I'll learn anything. I'm a hard worker. I promise. Isla gestured toward the building. I've got an extra room. Nothing fancy. But it's got a bed and a window. You can stay there if you want. In exchange, you help with projects around here. Building, maintenance, whatever needs doing. Maya stared at her. You're serious. I'm serious. But I need to know you're committed. This isn't easy work. It's physical. It's challenging and it takes patience. I can do it, Maya said quickly. I swear I can. Isla looked at her for another long moment, then nodded. Then come inside. I'll show you around. She led Maya through the front door, into the building that had been rusted and empty a year ago. That was now warm and complete and full of purpose. Maya looked around with wide eyes, at the painted walls, the furniture, the wood stove, the kitchen with running water. You built all this? She asked. I did, Isla said, with help from people in town. But mostly, yeah, I built it. By yourself. I didn't know how to build anything when I started. I learned as I went. Maya turned to look at her. How long did it take? A year, give or take. A year, Maya repeated quietly, like she was trying to imagine it. Isla led her to the small second bedroom, the one from her grandfather's blueprint, the one labeled guest room/future. It had a bed Isla had built last month, a small dresser, a window that looked out toward the east where the sun rose. This is yours if you want it, Isla said. Rules are simple. Work hard. Be honest. Clean up after yourself. And don't give up when things get hard. Maya set her backpack down slowly. She looked at the bed, the room, then back at Isla. Why are you helping me? She asked. Isla thought about that question, about her grandfather, about the money and the journal and the blueprint, about Archer and Sarah and Donovan and all the others who'd helped her without asking why. Because someone helped me, she said simply. And I think that's how it's supposed to work. Maya's eyes filled with tears. She wiped them away quickly. Thank you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Isla nodded. Get settled. Then come outside. I'll show you how to use a level. She walked back out to the porch, picked up her hammer, got back to work. A few minutes later, Maya came out. She'd changed into work clothes, pulled her hair back. I'm ready, she said. Isla handed her a pencil and a piece of wood. First lesson, measure twice, cut once. You make a mistake, you fix it. You don't quit. Understood. Maya nodded. Understood. And they got to work. The sun moved across the sky. The shadows lengthened. The sound of hammering echoed through the clearing. Two people building, learning, growing, the way it was meant to be. That evening, Isla and Maya sat on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains. The sky turned orange and purple. The air smelled like pine and fresh-cut lumber. Maya had been quiet most of the day, focused on learning, on doing things right. But now in the fading light she spoke. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "How did you know this would work building this place? Starting over? How did you know you could do it?" Isla thought about that. About the morning she'd stood in the parking lot with $43 and a choice. "I didn't," she said honestly. "I just knew I had to try." Maya nodded slowly. "I'm scared I'll mess this up, that I'll disappoint you." "You won't disappoint me by trying and failing. You'll only disappoint me by not trying at all." They sat in silence for a while, watching the colors fade from the sky. Then Maya spoke again. "The woman at the library, the one who told me about you. She said you bought this land for $10. Isla smiled. "That's right. $10 for all of this. $10 in taxes. The land itself was inherited from my grandfather. Did you know him?" "Barely. I was 5 the last time I saw him, but he knew me. Or at least he believed in who I could become." Maya looked at the building, at the garden starting to grow, at the chicken coop and the woodshed, and all the things Isla had built. "This is amazing," she said quietly. Isla followed her gaze, saw the place through Maya's eyes, not as the rusted shell it had been, but as what it had become: a home, a sanctuary, a place where someone lost could find themselves. "It's not finished," Isla said. "Probably never will be. There's always something to improve, something to fix, something to build." "That sounds exhausting." Isla smiled. "It sounds like living." The last light faded from the sky. Stars began to appear overhead, bright and clear in the Montana darkness. Inside, the wood stove crackled. Warm light glowed through the windows. Isla stood. "Come on, I'll teach you how to make dinner on a camp stove." Maya followed her inside, and as Isla showed the girl how to light the burner, how to heat the water, how to cook something simple but nourishing, she thought about her grandfather, about the sacrifice he'd made, the foundation he'd built, the future he'd believed in. He'd spent 48 years working for this moment, for the chance to give his granddaughter something real, something that mattered. And now that gift was multiplying, expanding, reaching beyond just Isla, because that's what real gifts do. They don't diminish when shared. They grow. One person helps another. That person helps someone else. And on and on. A chain of small kindnesses that builds something bigger than any individual could create alone. Her grandfather had known that, had planned for it. And now Isla was carrying it forward, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. because this was what home meant. Not just a roof and walls, but a place where people could find belonging, where they could learn who they were capable of becoming. Hila looked at Maya concentrating on stirring the pot without burning the food. The girl's tongue stuck out slightly in focus, her hands careful, deliberate, learning, and Isla smiled. This was the real inheritance, not the money in the jars or the acres in the forest, but this, the ability to give someone else the same chance you'd been given. The ability to say, I see you. I believe in you. Here's a place to start. That's what her grandfather had given her. And that's what she would pass forward, one person at a time, one day at a time, one board at a time. Building something that would last long after she was gone. Later that night, after Maya had gone to bed, Isla sat alone in the living area. The wood stove burned low. The room was warm and quiet. She opened the journal one more time, turned to a fresh page, and she wrote, Today someone asked me how I knew this would work. I told her I didn't, but that's not entirely true. I knew because of you, Grandpa. Because you showed me that the value of a beginning isn't measured by what you start with. It's measured by what you choose to build. You started with nothing but belief, and you built a foundation strong enough to hold everything that came after. I'm standing on that foundation now, and I'm building on it, not just for me, but for others who need the same chance you gave me. Some people leave their children money. You left me something better. You left me the courage to build my own life, and the wisdom to know that life is worth sharing. Thank you for the $10 land, for the money that was really time, for the blueprint that was really hope. But most of all, thank you for believing I was worth it. I'll spend the rest of my life proving you were right, with love and gratitude. Isla. She closed the journal, placed it back on the shelf. Outside, the Montana night was deep and still. Inside, the fire burned warm. And in a small bedroom down the hall, a girl who'd been lost was sleeping soundly for the first time in months. Safe. Sheltered. Given a chance. The same chance Isla had been given. The same chance her grandfather had worked 48 years to provide. The cycle continued. The foundation held, and somewhere in the quiet of that night, if you listened closely, you might have heard what sounded like an old man smiling, because his granddaughter had understood. She'd learned the lesson. She'd built well. And now she was teaching someone else to do the same. That was the real measure of success. Not the building you create, but the builders you inspire. Not the home you make, but the hope you give. Warren Hartley had known that, had planned for it, had sacrificed for it. And now, 1 year after his granddaughter had walked into a rusted metal building, with nothing but $43 and a key, his legacy was alive and growing, not in money, not in property, but in people, in purpose, in the quiet strength that comes from knowing you can build something real with your own two hands. That legacy would continue long after the building eventually crumbled, long after the land changed hands, long after the names were forgotten, because the real foundation wasn't made of concrete or earth. It was made of belief, of sacrifice, of love that works in silence and builds in secret and hopes without demanding recognition. That kind of foundation lasts forever. And Isla Hartley, standing on the foundation her grandfather built, was now building one for someone else. The way it was always meant to be. The way strong things endure. Not by standing alone, but by supporting what comes after.